Good evening. Welcome into the Inqurier podcast, live post-game podcast edition. And wow is all I have to say. I've seen a lot of Illinois losses that make you scratch your head, but that one was one of the ones that takes the cake. Is Illinois fumbles its way to a loss that keeps them from a bowl bid, losing 45-43 to Northwestern, which finishes the year 7-5, 5-4 under David Braun. Now, I didn't think it was a great game for David Braun, to be honest with you, but huge game for Casey Washington. Some good things in there for Illinois' offense, but boy, I'm counting up all the mistakes Illinois made in this one, Joey Wagner, and this is why they're not heading to a bowl game. Too many of these where Illinois had the turnovers, they had the penalties, they had the shots in the foot that cost them multiple wins this season, and that's why they're not playing in the postseason, and they've taken a step back in the Bret Bielema tenure in year 3 after an 8-5 season last year. It's a really disappointing end to a really disappointing season.
Yeah, the fact that we're going to start with the miscues and we still have the entire defense to cover, like that's what this was, right? This was a miss on a lot of different fronts. Yeah, this Northwestern had the season your basement was supposed to be coming into this year, right? With the trenches, like if you said before the year, hey, Illinois is going to go 7-5, people would have said, oof, I don't know, like just because there was a lot of excitement about this team with the new quarterback and the trench play. Then you come in and you're 5-7. There's rightfully people who are frustrated. Bret Bielema is frustrated. He's not going to hide that. He's frustrated. The players are frustrated. That this isn't how this was supposed to end on the 25th of November. Like this was supposed to be a team that goes into that bowl game that and their dreams and some prognosticators' thoughts like playing Indy in 2 weeks. And that's not happening. And that's today they lost that opportunity a while ago, but to miss a bowl game in this fashion, it's gutting. It's brutal. It's going to sting for them.
Yep.
And there's cause for disappointment from everybody.
No, this is we're not going to sugarcoat this season or these last 2 games, these late game failures and fourth quarter. What a wild fourth quarter this was. 37 points were scored in this fourth quarter. But for Illinois, this game swung on 2 huge special teams miscues. Isaiah Williams, you just got a 3-and-out after scoring and going
a 3-and-out. The defense got a 3-and-out. Like that, only had them twice on the possessions before that. Like that felt like the change. I'm sorry, Jeremy, but that was like, oh my God, they got a 3-and-out.
Oh my God, they got an incompletion. Right, from Ben Bryant with the way the secondary was playing the last couple games of the season. But you get a 3-and-out. Isaiah Williams, who, if that's his final game, I hate it. That's the way he goes out with a muffed return. 4 plays later, Ben Bryant scores a touchdown. Next play, Kenari Wilcher fumbles it, and they return it for a touchdown. Like it was like, oh my gosh! And to this team's credit, they came back. Northwestern gave them extra opportunities, and they almost tied the game. And it came down to a 2-point conversion that Bret Bielema called bullshit after the game. He thought it was a hold. Dean Blandino said on the broadcast, I guess, that it was a hold. They call it a defensive pass interference, but if it's a tip ball and a defensive pass interference, it doesn't count. So all of that is to say, what an Illinois way to lose this game. I get why Illinois fans feel like everything bad is going to happen to this program because you had the game 31-28, get the ball back, score a touchdown, felt like you're in a bowl game. And whatever could go wrong went wrong on those next 2 plays. And it's special teams, right? Special teams, which every way Iowa finds a way to win a game feels like Illinois finds the way to lose the game. That is the difference between those 2 programs right now. I don't think there's a huge difference otherwise. Like their defense obviously is way better right now, but I'm just saying like Illinois is in a bunch of close games, but they seem to make the mistakes that lose them and make you go 5-3 instead of going 8-0 in all of them. Well, Iowa probably would have found a way to win all these games because they don't shoot themselves in the foot. The mistakes, Paddock interception early on, not a good throw. Bobbled snap on 3rd and 1. You got to settle for a field goal. Newton gets a huge sack on a 3rd down. What do you know? It's a secondary penalty. Tyler Strain, hold. Tyus fumbles into the end zone. Great play by Dylan Rosiak. Northwestern, luckily, recovers it in the end zone. Those
that
are
ball
the things that
feels like it sat on the ground like we watched the replay because it took a minute to understand what it was. It's like, oh my God, that ball was on the ground for, dude, it felt like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I don't think it was that long, but it felt like forever.
And Joey, you probably have the stat. I know you've done a story on it, but the end of first half defense, Aaron Henry figured it out. Figure it out, man. 109 left, and they just marched down the field. They're attacking Zach Toby constantly. He got pulled for Jaheim Clark. They attacked Jaheim Clark. Listen, the secondary was on its third string players late in the season. 3 starters went out of this game with an injury. You already don't have Matthew Bailey, but 2 drives, they double dip, take the lead in beginning of the third quarter, Joey, and then those special teams errors happen. Then Casey Washington happened, which was a positive, but you can't survive that many mistakes no matter what team you're playing. I don't think that Northwestern team is all that great. I thought Illinois probably was the better team, but they kept shooting themselves in the foot, and Northwestern didn't.
Yeah, let's break this down into 2 different segments. I feel like there are 2 14-point swings that are everything in this game. We'll start with that. Miles Scott gets a pick 6, and you think they're gonna kind of Iowa this thing, right? They're gonna make these plays, and they're gonna get there. And there's
final defensive play.
Yes,
Ben Bryant threw it up there. It was a can of corn, but finally you make that play and you swing a game.
And there's 109 left in the half, and you think, oh my, just get to halftime because you've got a lead. Northwestern scores with 8 seconds left. It's a 1 minute, 1 second drive. They go down and score. They come back in 4:08 to open the third and score a touchdown. That's 5:17 of game time.
And Ben Bryant completed 9 of 9 passes for 129 yards.
Yes, and it's a 14-point swing, and you don't even touch the ball. It's everything Bret Bielema wants to do when he elects to kick, so he can do that, and you don't get the chance to do that. And then, to your point, 9 seconds of game time with those 2 special teams blunders. I guess the special teams, the touchdown off the special teams blunder, and then the kickoff fumble. So that's in 9 seconds, another 14-point swing. So in less than 6 minutes total, you've given up 2 separate 14-point swings. And like this team just isn't built to deal with that. And like you can't have those mistakes when we've talked so much, right? Like every week we talk about there's just not a lot of margin for error with this team. And there's a lot of things you can dive into. Secondary has been bad for weeks. We've talked about that for weeks. But just things that you thought were supposed to be constants, and the turnovers, the mental errors, like they pop up, and you've got to find a way to eradicate those if you're going to be in these close 1 possession games. And if that's you're just going to grind and claw, like if that's your mindset to win, those things are just they ruin that. They completely throw it away.
24 points off 4 turnovers. This not Bret Bielema said it. You're going to lose every game. It's amazing they had a chance to win this game. At the end, kudos to their offense for making some plays in this game. Kudos to Casey Washington for a phenomenal game to go out on. Just too bad it didn't happen with a win. But here's the problem. Illinois had 23 turnovers this year. That's going to be one of the bottom 10 in the country. And they're going to be one of the bottom teams in actually forcing turnovers. They're going to be bottom 3rd of the country. This team just was not good enough to be able to overcome that. So those errors, penalties, Bret Bielema talks about tough, smart, and dependable. They weren't smart and dependable this year, right, Joey? Like that's something they got to figure out, whether it's getting better players to execute, getting more experience, or figuring things out on the coaching staff. We'll dive into this. I know there's a lot of talk about the defense we'll dive into and what needs to happen moving forward with Illinois. But those kind of mistakes, those are what lose games. Those are what lost games for Lovie Smith, what lost games for Tim Beckman, Ron Zook, all of it.
Yeah, when you preach 3 core elements of being tough and smart and dependable, and you miss on 2 of those elements, or you could make arguments. There was games they missed in all 3, or pick a way to combo platter the 2 of 3. It's not getting you there, and you're just not equipped. Like you don't. This isn't the talent of obviously the top 3 in the Big Ten, right? Or you're going to look west and see more coming in. You've got to be fundamental, and when you're not, you end up in a 5-7 season, and you're going home before December.
Yeah. I don't know how much more we want to break down this game. I think we covered what the issues were, right? Casey Washington, again, I want to shout out. What a performance. I didn't know he had that in him, to be honest with you, at times, but he's going to be potentially on my all Big Ten ballot with the way he ended this season. Like 2 of his final 3 games were 99+ yards, 219 yards today, 3 touchdowns, 3 of his 4 touchdowns, receiving touchdowns in his career were today. I thought Johnny Newton was awesome. He should have had 3 sacks. 1 was taken away with the strain, had 2 other sacks, had a quarterback hit that led to the interception for Tyler Strain. He's probably going to be my vote for Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, even on a 5-7 team. That tells you how good he was. He's going to be a consensus All-American. should win more honors. Just too bad he
top
was
15 draft pick.
Yeah, too bad those guys weren't on a better team to go out with, and too bad he didn't take advantage of having those guys.
I know there was a lot of, I don't know, dialogue, discourse around Johnny Newton, basically saying like, yeah, this is it for me at Illinois, like regardless of outcome, which obviously, right, that was the obvious answer. But this dude tried to pull that defense to a bowl game, even that he wasn't going to play in it. And his performance today was really good. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary of what we've seen this season, which is exactly how good his season's been, exactly how he should be remembered at Illinois for what he did on the field. It's just right now that some of that might be clouded. I get it. Might be clouded by the team being 5-7.
Here's the thing. I'm not going to call for any coach firings today. I don't think that is clearly the solution for everything. I think Aaron Henry's got to figure some things out, especially late in games. He didn't have a secondary really to work with late in this season with the injuries. We talked about running back a lot. The secondary was insane, especially in this game when Clayton Bush left the game. I didn't know he left the game. Taz Nicholson left the game early. Xavier Scott, probably your best defensive back all year, left. And you were just down to freshman. This is where missing on the JUCOs. Caleb Patterson and Prince Ford were not there. That's on the staff. That you didn't have another defensive back from the transfer portal that made an impact. Listen, I had big questions about Aaron. Last week on the podcast, I graded his first season a D+. Probably a D now. Like we're going lower than that. He's got some things to figure out. I don't think Bret Bielema is making a move. I didn't get that read. I asked him about how he evaluates his staff and himself moving forward. I don't get that vibe, and I don't think he hired him to fire him after one season. But there are certainly things they got to get better at. I was encouraged by Barry Lunny's end of the season. The last 6 weeks I thought were really, really good. But Illinois is continually in close games, and that's not good enough this year. That's not good enough this year. But you are in close games. I don't think this program's like never going to be good under Bret Bielema. I've been encouraged by a lot of things under Bret Bielema, Joey, but there should be disappointment in the fact that you didn't elevate. Like you didn't continue or sustain success from last year. And we knew there were going to be issues with this team, where there's working in a new quarterback, working in all these different pieces on the secondary. But to have that many opportunities to win games, close games, or to not show up against Nebraska or Purdue, that's really disappointing. But if there's people like calling for everybody's job, I'm just not in that boat yet. I think the staff's going to get way more time, but they got to evaluate some things, Joey, and they got to add a lot more talent because they're losing a lot of talent that's going out that door. And it's going to be more Bret Bielema's roster moving forward than the guys he inherited.
Yeah, I didn't get that sense either. And look, I don't know when we're going to talk to Bret Bielema again before signing day, if we will. And these conversations we'll have. Like we'll ask what we need to ask. We do every signing day. But I want to just hit on the secondary one more time because and obviously the transfer portal is going to be a huge portion of the conversation for the next month and a half, because that's what this stretch of the calendar is. What you just can't miss like they did in the secondary in the portal. And the two guys that Clayton Bush and Inqurier Harper played, but the JUCO take, like you can't put the two guys who you're supposed to bring in for more experience on the field late in the game when injuries are just absolutely eviscerating you and your freshmen are getting picked on time and time over. That was a miss. Like that was a miss back when you had the chance to build this roster. Bret Bielema pointed to the offensive line. He doesn't feel like they had enough ready to play offensive linemen. He said ideally you would like 7 or 8. What do you think, Jeremy? They had 6 they felt comfortable with, 6.5.
I mean, they played like 8 or 9, but yeah, I think they felt comfortable with 4, to be honest with you.
Right. And you had to reshape that. You had to reshape that midway through the year. So some of those decisions that they made last offseason are turning up, and they turned up this season, and it hurt them in a way that you couldn't. Like, man, back-to-back bowls. Like we've talked about this before Illinois went on that run last year. 6 wins with 3 non-conference games. And I understand Illinois played Kansas in the non-conference this year. That is not – when you're in the Big Ten West, like, you do a lot worse. Like, that bar isn't exactly the highest thing in the world. And just to get to 2 just feels like such a weight off the shoulder as you try to build something and sustain something and get that energy around, and to miss on that, especially the way, like, you circle this game. Obviously, we're podcasting after this game, but go back to the other ones. Go back to Purdue. Go back to, like, the way that it happened, I think, is what really feels like the gut punch for this, for right now, that you were right there in all these opportunities.
Knew this would be a pretty fiery post-game chat with everybody. We'll get to your questions. We'll get to your comments coming up. Let's hear a little bit from Bret Bielema, and we'll dive into more of what missing a bowl game means for this. We'll dive into the offseason as well. But here's Bret Bielema post-game.
Well, obviously very disappointed in the results. I've never, through these 12 games, ever questioned the heart, the desire, the fight, the faith, the belief that these guys have had. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough to will us through where we were today. It was the first game of the year, the last game of the year here, that nothing has ever changed. What we try to preach these guys, that more games are lost than won, and unfortunately, we did enough things today to cause us defeat. Give credit to Northwestern. They're obviously able to achieve a win, but to give up 24 points out of on turnovers, you just never going to win games like that. Never. So extremely frustrating. A lot of guys stepped up. We were really thin in the back end, and then Taz had practiced all week, and obviously wasn't able to go out there today. He tried on the front end, and then to lose Xavier Scott really thinned up that room in a hurry, and that was something they continue to come back and attack, and we're just the good news is, right, we can go out and recruit and have an opportunity for some of these younger players to get better. The flip side of it is we're just running real thin at times there in the back end, but guys showed resiliency offensively. Casey Washington was, just incredible today. He's just a microcosm today of what I've seen all year. Just a really good competitive spirit, and even down to that last touchdown. And I think the 2-point play, it's just complete bullshit on the call. The guy held him. I was trying to get him to say, I thought they called defensive holding, and if they call defensive holding, tip doesn't matter. But that's just one play. But it sucks that the season comes down to that, right? So. Very frustrating, and if there is one word, I know I'm going to get this a lot, right? What's the 2023 season? And it's just extremely frustrating in so many different levels that we've dealt with through 12 games. So unfortunately, a lot of analysis ahead of us. Have an extremely challenging next 3 or 4 days. Going to have a lot of conversations with guys that are on our program, guys that will be moving on from our program, guys that have played their last game and we've known it, but other guys that we have conversations with to see where we can go. So I know where we are 3 years from where we got here, and how much growth we've had, but it obviously didn't put us in postseason play, which is everything. So I'm frustrated, but it's not lost on a lot of good young players that got better, a lot of old players that put in a lot of good work, effort, and time to help us change this environment, and hopefully going to get us on a track to move forward in the future. But sorry, disappointed. I thought there was a good crowd out there today. For those that showed up, I appreciate it. You were there till the end, and unfortunately we weren't able to get it. So with that, I'll open up the question. Injury-wise, I really don't know anything about anything other than Xavier will have an MRI tomorrow. Keith re-aggravated his ankle injury that was there. Taz had a pre-existing injury from last week that he practiced all this week, but obviously wasn't able to go today.
All right, there's Bret Bielema. We'll get to some of your questions. Send in those super chats if you'd like. We'll get to some of these comments. Pretty fiery here, Joey. I'm trying to avoid them while we do this podcast just so I don't get sidetracked with some of the things people are saying. But this is a blow. This is a big blow. I asked somebody in the Illini program before the game, like, how much does this mean for recruiting? And they said it's significant. Because I think the biggest thing, talking with them is you can sell that you're still progressing. You're still doing things that this program hasn't done in a really long time. To make back-to-back bowl games, even if it would have been kind of a disappointing 6-6, Joey, they haven't done that since 2011. They've only done that once in this century, right? Like, that would have been significant. And to get the Land of Lincoln Trophy for a third straight year would have been significant. And you can just kind of sell that, hey, we're going to a bowl game. We're developing NFL guys. Now it feels like you kind of missed out. Like, it feels like you underachieved with all that NFL talent. Even last year, you had a chance to win the Big Ten West. 2 weeks remaining, you had a chance to still be alive in the Big Ten West. You wouldn't have won it because Iowa beat Nebraska. but you didn't even make a bowl game with Johnny. You made one bowl game with Johnny Newton on your team. That seems crazy, right? So yeah, it's a blow, and now you got to go recruit more talent because you're losing a lot of it. You're losing a lot of your best players. You got Luke Altmaier coming back. You feel like a running back room can be good. If you can get Isaiah Williams back, I think that'd be significant. But there's so much you're replacing up front defensively on the offensive line. They're going to have to hit the O-line and D-line portal really hard. And can they get guys who are huge difference makers? We still got to see that.
Yeah, and you need, like, the way you need to attack the portal, the offensive line, the defensive line, you can make a very real argument for the secondary, and I don't think anyone would bat an eye. Those are also the most competitive portal recruitments not named quarterback, right? Like, that's where, obviously, the very, very high end at certain positions, but those typically are the most competitive because there's not enough. Like, there's not enough offensive tackles, there's not enough edge rushers, defensive linemen to play at that level. And that I understand. If you're looking at that, you're seeing who's walking out the door, who's going to the NFL. That is like, I can understand where that concern would be.
How do you get better?
Proposition.
How do you get better is my big question moving forward. How do you get better losing Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph? How do you get better losing Isaiah Adams and Julian Pearl?
Potentially Isaiah Williams. Seth Coleman has a decision to make. That's
huge.
It's a scary thought. It's a super scary thought if you're looking at what this roster is next year with what teams are coming into the Big Ten.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, this schedule set up so well. So well. You had 3 first-year coaches. You lost to all of them.
They were 1-4. They beat Tom Herman. When we say first year, like first year, oh boy, sitting in the dark. When we say first year, like I'm going to assume like first year at where their current program, not first year in its entirety. So Tom Herman, they beat at Florida Atlantic, lost to Ryan Walters at Purdue, lost to Matt Rule at Nebraska or against Nebraska, lost to Luke Fickell against Wisconsin.
That's four first-year coaches.
And then Northwestern. And like I say first year of the program because that is right. Like
I'm not throwing Tom Herman in that mix, Joey. I'm sorry. That's
well. Then you can't put Fickell in there either, right? Like,
well, first year Big Ten coaches. Like,
okay, so we're just gonna take FAU out.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure I knew what we were doing.
This West stunk.
Sure,
absolutely
no doubt.
Stunk,
yeah, I'm not trying
3-6.
to gloss over that. Absolutely. Like this was, you look around the West, and it was somebody had to win at division, and you had Toledo turned out to be a pretty good team, but you had the West. FAU with the first-year head coach there, or new head coach, I should say. Yeah, that's why when a lot of people looked at the schedule, it was like, oh, could this be one of those teams? And I think that's where the excitement, the preseason excitement came from when you combined what they returned, and it did not land in that way at all.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Like, I still think Bielema can accomplish things here. I still think, like, these first 3 years, when you compare it historically, are far better than any of his predecessors since going back to Makovic, right? Lou Tepper, I guess, inherited a good situation, a good defense, and was competitive for a while, but a full new head coach. It's been a long time since they've won 18 games in the first 3 years, right? But you're only getting one bowl game out of it. It feels a little empty given the opportunities that you have. So maybe I'm not giving a fiery take enough for anybody who wants change, which isn't going to happen. They're not changing coaches here. He's got several more years to do this thing, but this is a disappointing thing because you felt like you could elevate. And that's my question. Can you elevate after a 5-7 season? Can you elevate after losing the talent you're going to lose? Can you develop the talent you have in your program? Do you have enough of a foundation that you can improve on the things that cost you wins this year?
And if you don't feel like you go into next season with those things, are you equipped to be active in the market to acquire those things?
Yeah.
Right. Like that's my secondary question. That if you look at this roster, if you're in the Smith Center on Monday or tomorrow, and you look at this roster and you feel like no, are you in a position to address that in the course of the next 4 months? Mm-hmm. And I don't know. Like, I don't have that answer right now, but those are the two biggest questions to me.
Yeah, so here's what I expect. The next 3 days, Bielema is going to meet with his players. I'm sure there's a lot of staff evaluation they got to do, but the most important thing now is roster. Like, I think they're going to do a lot in January, February as a staff of evaluation of themselves. Right now, it's all about roster. And you got to figure out who can you retain, who's leaving, who do you want to leave potentially, right? And who can you go get? And they can't hit the recruiting trail until next week. The focus through early signing period, Joey, is going to be offensive line, defensive line transfers. And I think it's mostly going to be defensive line transfers. They had a JUCO kid, edge Daniel Brown here today, so they can add a pass rusher in case Seth Coleman leads junior college in sacks. They had a cornerback who was at NC State a couple years, probably would have started for them this year, Joshua Pierre-Louis. They had him on campus, so definitely need to upgrade the secondary. But they've offered a couple Ivy League kids on the defensive line. They're not going to be Johnny Newton, but they're pretty good. And they've offered Asian Shepherd, a JUCO kid who I think they'd like to get on campus. So that's going to be the focus, is upgrading the defensive line, because you're losing Johnny Newton, you're losing Keith Randolph. I think Denzel Daxon has a pretty good chance of coming back, but you got to get 2 guys who can potentially start on the defensive line. So that's going to be the focus. I think offensive line, they might take some more time to evaluate some JUCOs, see who they really like. Got to get a tackle. Because you think Brandon Henderson's going to start at 1, got to add a tackle, and then you got to add more competition, Joey. There was not enough depth this year. I think Bret Bielema knows that if he could take it back, he kind of mentioned that today.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have gotten another guard in the portal and gotten a little bit more depth there. I think they're going to be a little bit more aggressive on that end.
Yeah, and tackle is the biggest need. Last offseason, it felt like center. And now, given what we saw earlier on in this season, given who's leaving, who's walking out that door, it's tackle. I like some of who they have at guard. I also recognize that some of those guys need more time. They just need more time, and you're fighting against time at a lot of those positions in terms of trying to where you're going. So, yeah, I expect, if you'll remember, Jeremy, a few years ago when they got Tommy DeVito, we were covering a basketball game, and we looked up and it's like, what? Hello. I would expect them to try to get people through here. Yes. Get people into campus. That's how Luke Altmaier ended up here. I remember he committed when we were driving to Tampa. That's what the season is now, is to go and try to get people here, try to sell them on opportunity. Bret Bielema mentioned they had some guys here who they can see an opportunity to play pretty quickly.
AJ Dennis, 4-star offensive lineman.
He may as well just look at the camera and said him. That's what it is. Some people love that portion of the calendar year, and some people don't. It kind of depends on what your flavor is, but those needs don't minimize the disappointment of what this was. And I'm curious how last season, when this all settles, one of my questions for Bret Bielema is going to be, how did your past roster building experiences here shape what you've done this offseason, what you set out to do this offseason? And of course, that's a little bit dependent on how this shakes out and who they get. But right. I'm curious how that's changed for him, if at all.
Brad, man, $40 super chat. That's too much, man. We owe you a beer. Gentlemen, your professionalism, continue to pursue the story, and overall coverage of the team was second to none. Thank you, Brad. Thank you for supporting my work as well. He's awesome. If you check out Brad's stuff on Twitter, TCR Brad. I hope they made pizzas in the press box for you guys tonight. I got a brat in me.
Brad, we got money for pizza now, buddy.
Now we do.
Thank you. Your work is the best, man. We appreciate you.
Yeah, so this offseason, Altmaier was a hit, right? And John Paddock, certainly, they did well at the quarterback transfer portal. They've been doing that well. So kudos to Barry Lunny. And Bret Bielema got Tommy DeVito, right, along with Tony Peterson. Shout out TP. But also, Denzel Daxon was a win. Weren't enough other wins, Joey. Defensive backfield, offensive line, obviously Desmond Schuster with the medical issue. There weren't enough other wins, especially in that secondary.
No, and I think to me, that's what some of the question leads. Did you feel like you could get by? Isn't the right term. I don't want to put that thought into anyone's brain, but when you've got a Johnny Newton, a Keith Rand, did you feel like you could makeshift these lights? My goodness, did you feel like you could get by? I guess that's the best word I keep coming back to with trying to find these guys that you feel like you could develop up into what Denzel Daxon turned out to be this year, who down the stretch of the season was a good defensive lineman. Do you try to go hunting for more stars, more just natural talent?
Do you think they can get those guys? Do you think they can get the?
I don't know.
Quarterback is something because there's only so many positions, and Illinois has done a good job getting that. But you got your guy in Luke Altmaier, and I know he didn't play the last couple games. It's one of the most unique things that's ever happened, right? Just to have a quarterback do what John Paddock did late in the season. So I have faith that Luke Altmaier is going to be pretty good. I think this offense can be pretty good if they get a wide receiver. I mean, you might have to go and get a wide receiver in the portal as well. You've already added Mario Sanders, the JUCO leader in receptions. But I think if Illinois fans are expecting to go get somebody that Ole Miss wants or Texas A&M wants or name your powerhouse program with deep NIL pockets. I don't think
I wouldn't set those expectations.
No, I think where Illinois is going to go is JUCO. They got to hit more. They got to be better evaluators. Isaiah Adams, Zy Chrysler, for all the mistakes Zy Chrysler made early in the season, those guys are big hits, right? You got to do better than what you did last year, though, in the JUCO portal. I think FCS transfers are going to be big. They've offered a couple guys in the defensive line that aren't going to be Johnny Newton, but I think they can be starters for this team. I think Division II guys you could even look at, but I don't think there's going to be the offensive tackle from a Power 5. No, I think it's going to be a JUCO. Defensive lineman from a Power 5, maybe if he's kind of buried on the bench somewhere, but you're not going to get a Keon Coleman out there in the portal. Like, otherwise, donate all the money you got to Icon and give them something to work with. Like, Illinois doesn't have the pockets yet of some of those other teams. So it's something Bret Bielema's got to work around, right? You have a good developmental cell, but you're a developmental program. And that's why I think the development of the guys inside the program, getting Malik Elsie, Sabor Kareem, Zach Toby after a tough game today, some of those 2022 guys, they're going to be in their third year now. Like, some of those guys got to make some big impacts on this program. I think Caden Fagan could be a star next year. Like, I would predict if he could stay healthy for 12 games, he's going to rush for 1,000 yards. He's going to be the next Bret Bielema 1,000-yard rusher. I think Luke Altmaier can be still one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I really do. I think he's really talented. So there are some encouraging pieces, but you got to get the depth. You got to get the pieces in the trenches, Joey, to build this thing up again.
Yeah, two things I want to bring up. Like, as I see these chats go, like, I'm not even gonna. Like, I don't think. Here's the thing. I don't want to sit here and tell people, like, hey, don't sweat it. This is their route. Like, I get it.
No.
If that route is not for you, if you don't feel like that is something that's sustainable, like, I'm not going to sit here right now and tell you otherwise. But like, I'd also say, look at film, evaluate what you want to do. But you and I aren't sitting here saying, like, don't worry about that. Yeah, they'll be fine. Like,
it's a huge hurdle.
Yes,
like,
that's right.
You have to find guys at the lower levels. They have to evaluate well. They have to develop well. Like, that's where you are in the college football landscape. And I think you can win games and be competitive that way. But, like, my goal for Illinois is to make bowl games every year. Like, we can talk, and Lauren Tate always gets upset, like, well, what are we playing for? You're not even going to be competing for a Big Ten championship. There's like 3 or 4 teams that are probably going to be competing for a lot of Big Ten championships moving forward. Ohio State, Michigan, maybe Oregon is involved in that. Illinois got to get to the point where they're just getting into postseasons consistently. And I think they can do that by this model, but they got to do better by evaluating and developing and adding depth to this program. Brad said, is it quantity or quality? It's both. You got to have more quantity and quality of guys that you can count on to contribute. That's why Iowa, they lose Cooper DeJean, they win 2 more games. That's what they do.
So which, I mean, is there, to me, this year I lean a little bit more towards quantity. Like, I like the quality of those top guys. Obviously, Johnny Newton, Isaiah Williams, Keith Randolph, Isaiah Adams. Like, that's good. Those are quality Big Ten players. Yes. They're going to be on those postseason lists. This year, to me, it was a quantity. And it was you just get back there, and you're not equipped to deal with injuries hitting it. And an unfortunate rash, right? Like, the secondary had an unfortunate rash of injuries, but you weren't equipped to overcome that.
And for all the credit we need to give Lovie Smith for some of the stars on this team, the issues of the 2020 class, the 2021 class, and recruiting a first year for Bret Bielema, where 2022, you were barely recruiting and all that stuff. Like, those guys are still developing, but that's where those recruiting classes hurt. That's where, and they've had opportunities to replace that, and they did not replace enough of it in the transfer portal and JUCO recruiting last year. They did not hit on enough of those guys.
That's right. And I see people asking, what's the sell right now? Right now, the sell is, if we're talking about the level of players that we've just been talking about, the sell is a starting spot in the Big Ten, or competing for a starting spot in the Big Ten. Like, I understand the frustration right now. There's still a lot of value in that. And everyone's kind of got their different ways, but, like, that's what their sell is, right? Their sell is, hey, we are open at this position, this position, this position, this position. This is how you find your way into a starting spot. And we'll see how that sell lands.
Dallas asks, seriously, what the hell are you selling recruits this offseason? In year 4, maybe we'll make a bowl game without a division to cushion us. It's okay. We could talk about this. I don't know how much a bowl game is going to sell a transfer. You know what's going to sell a transfer? Opportunity, number one. NIL is in there somewhere. Number 2. 3, development. I want to get to the league. And Illinois can sell, they can get you to the league if you're talented enough. Like that, this staff has shown that they can develop guys into NFL players better than the previous staff did, and better than a lot of coaches in the Big Ten. They've shown that they can develop talent individually. They just did not develop enough of it this year, have enough of that talent this year, or depth this year to overcome some of the injuries that they had. So I think they have a sell to defensive linemen. Like Terrence Jamison is a heck of a developer of talent. No matter what you think of his recruiting or whatever, and Denzel Jackson was a pretty good find by him. And he's got a really good recruiting class coming in this year, trying to add to it. But I think if you're trying to sell defensive linemen, Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph is a pretty good place to start. You can still sell the defensive backs, but you got to sell it well. Like you got to get a talent like Joshua Pierre-Louis, one of the best JUCO corners. You got to get another transfer safety probably to add some experience behind. Matthew Bailey's coming off an injury. Miles Scott needs to be pushed for a starting job, even though he's had 2 pick sixes this year. Really struggled in the middle of the season. You got to find more competition for all those guys.
You do, and like you saw some of that they addressed last offseason. Clayton Bush, N'Keal Harper, when Matthew Bailey went down, those 2 really mattered. But you're right. Like transfer recruiting is different than high school recruiting because there's an immediacy to it. There's an immediate need to maximize the 1 or 2, however many more years you have to put yourself in a position. And there are positions that Illinois can sell. Like, Johnny Newton, when he's walking across the stage in Detroit in April, that's probably attractive to a defensive lineman. And yes, a 5-7 season is some other coach who's recruiting that lineman's going to say, man, they went 5-7. They go, you got to overcome that. It's got to be relationships. It's got to be development. Like that's going to be something you have to overcome.
Sean, I think we need to go back to being conservative on returns. The risk isn't worth it since we can't hold on the ball. Before we came on to this podcast, what I say, Joey?
You said the same thing. Sean and Jeremy are pretty mirrored here.
I was like, I don't see the upside of returning it unless like you get the ball at the 10-yard line and take it out. Like it's just the fumble chances. And Kenari Wilshire is trying to make a play. And here's what I want to say. If you're listening to this, do not tweet at any of these kids. They feel way worse than you. I saw so many people, so many of those players come off in tears. They care more than you. And I know you care. You spend a lot of time, effort, energy, money into this team. Those guys work all year for this opportunity, and they came up short, and they have to reckon with that. And it was emotional for a lot of them. So, listen, you can tweet at coaches if you want. You can say whatever, but, like, it hurts these guys. It hurts these guys a lot. So, but, yeah, special teams returns, got to be able to catch punts. I love Isaiah. I hope I get to cover another season of him. He was unbelievable this year. His first team All Big Ten. Too many muff punt returns. And that's one of the hardest jobs. We've seen it happen with Illinois a lot, but it killed you. And then Kenari Wilshire to follow it up. I think, especially on kickoff returns, there's just no point. Like, it's just catch the ball, down it, and get to the next play. Illinois hasn't had a kick return touchdown in 10 years. So,
yeah, it's interesting because Sean Snyder a year ago, that was the thought, like to be aggressive in that, and then that quickly turned around. That, like, the first kick return, you'll remember, was taken out, and you're like, oh my gosh, something, and then it never happened again, and then they got pretty conservative on that front. Mm-hmm. To me, I always feel like Robbie Disher's coverage units are what, like, that's what when I think of Robbie Disher as a special teams coordinator, I'm not trying to excuse the fumbles, but like he is aggressive in a lot of ways. But I think of him as like in those coverage situations. So I would assume him and Bret Bielema are going to have conversations about being conservative in those and seeing if aggression is their best path forward. That being said, I did like what Kenari Wilshire did, but there's a risk return, like there's a risk reward balance you have to come with there.
Brandon, for how negative this year ended, I think the offense was solid.
Total turnaround from Nebraska. This podcast was so different after that Nebraska game, and they flipped that. And I thought the offense did play well down the stretch. Was not perfect. It was not perfect, but I thought they really. We talked about the Nebraska game. It was like, oh boy, this is. I don't know where they go from here right now. And Barry Lunny and this offensive staff put together a string of games that gave them a chance to back into a bowl game.
I think their offense works. I really do, especially if they got an offensive line and they have a physical rushing attack. I thought they really missed Caden Fagan the last 2 games. I think Reggie Love played great the last 2 games, but you needed that physical presence, and you see what that can do for an offense in those short yarded situations where you just got to get kind of cute when you're Barry Lunny without that guy. right? And an offensive line interior that can be a little iffy at times, but teams know what's coming. And it can be difficult to do that. But, last 6 games, 27 at Maryland, 21 against Wisconsin, 27 against Minnesota, 48 against Indiana, 13 against Iowa. You scored a touchdown. Most teams aren't scoring touchdowns against them. In Northwestern, you scored 43 points. Like, they played well enough to win, obviously, today. Casey Washington, a big part of that. But I'm encouraged by them. I have more questions on defense. Not that I think a change is coming. But Bret Bielema, you asked him about the defense. Made an interesting point about this defense has now been existing for 3 years. Teams kind of know what this defense is, what its issues are, what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are. And the 2 teams that finished bottom of the Big Ten, I guess Michigan State and Indiana did, but bottom of the Big Ten West in scoring points per game given up on defense, 28 for Illinois. They're 11th in the Big Ten. Purdue gave up 30.4 points per game, 14th in the Big Ten. So I think Ryan Walters and Bret Bielema are probably going to have to spend this offseason going, okay, well, did teams figure out our defense, or is this a personnel issue?
Yeah, I think I need to go back and listen to Bret Bielema's exact words on this, but he had talked about, we kind of play, it's what he said, 2 different types of defensive man, and then those 2, like the quarter, I don't remember exactly what he called it, but I got the sense, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but bringing up like the balance between the 2, I got the sense that maybe he wanted to lean more into one or the other. Like maybe that's the conversation moving forward. Is, hey, we're going to be a man team, and the hell with what comes bad of it, because we believe that the good will overlap that. So
that's where I would go with. I think Henry got in trouble when he wasn't aggressive, and Bret Bielema made a comment on the radio at halftime. We need to be a more aggressive defense.
Yeah, so I think that is, you live with the problems that man's going to bring, and we've seen, especially this year, we saw teams running a lot of crosser routes and challenging those young defensive backs
pre-snap motion
to communicate who had who, and there were breakdowns. Like there were breakdowns from that. So I think like that's what I took from Bret Bielema's answer to me. I don't know if that's what he meant. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but like when you say we're going between 2, I think he would be more comfortable going with 1 and with some curveballs mixing. You can't just be 1 all the time, but felt like they were. I didn't see a lot of consistency, I guess, maybe in that. So I think those will probably be a lot of the conversations that come up.
Yeah, I think Aaron got into his head a little bit sometimes, but we got to change the picture all the time. He used that a lot. I get that. You got to try and confuse quarterbacks. I also just want quarterbacks to have to be able to make throws. And Ben Bryant made some throws today. Sorsby made some throws.
Like the Toledo game, I felt like all offseason he freaked himself out about DeQuan Fenn's running ability. And he can, man. He can be really explosive. We've seen that for the next 11 games. But the other part is make him make passes. Like make him make passes. Like so it started kind of back then where I feel like he maybe overthought it.
Yeah, and you gotta go to your strength. And your strength is your front 5 and let those guys cook. And if you get beat on the back end, tip your cap, like it'll happen. But I think that's the key for them moving forward. I think it's a big year for Bret Bielema to coach his coach, right? Especially his defense coordinator. He does it we've heard it with Barry Loney the last 2 years. But I think it's a big offseason for him to coach him up as well. Ben, haven't lost faith in Bielema or the direction of the program, but what a missed opportunity this year. The loss of talent to the draft was big, but you would not have missed a bowl game in the Big Ten West. That's well said, Ben. Just a missed opportunity.
Yeah, man.
Huge missed opportunity.
I don't know that, just given what Bret Bielema said to us in the post-game press conference, I don't know that they would argue with that. Like, I don't know that they would argue with that or the players would argue with that. Like, that is, that is a very fair assessment. Like, it's spot on.
Ian, guys, we've been a bye week in the Big Ten for over a decade. We're tough out now. I agree with that. We find a quarterback for next year and we'll be fine. The second part is that you have a quarterback in Luke Altmaier. Who's your backup quarterback? I think is a really important question because injuries happen. We see it every year. Is it Donovan Leary? Is it Trey Petty? Is it somebody else? Like, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the offseason there, but it's going to be a big offseason, I think, for Donovan Leary to win that backup job and to gain the confidence of the Illini staff that he can be that.
Yeah, and look, we also should say we haven't talked to Luke Altmaier since the decision to go to John Paddock. Like I don't want to put words in his mouth or speak for him. I'm curious come spring to talk to him, and because this was a change from what he thought was going to happen, and I don't think, and I don't think he played so poorly that like
he did not lose this job,
right? So like I understand like that is a question I have too, but I wanted like I'm very eager to speak with him and hear his thoughts on how this went down and just where he's at right now.
Yeah, and I think he'll be here. I don't think that's a question. I think Illinois was very clear in upfront with him about this. And John Paddock, I asked him about it again. He said, Luke has been awesome. He said, I know how hard it is to prepare yourself when you're a backup quarterback. Sometimes it sucks. But he said he brought the energy. He trained like he was starting that week. So just from John Paddock himself, who I found to be very forthcoming and honest with us, like I took a lot about that. I think Luke Altmaier took this as well as he possibly could, but it certainly sucked. It had to suck for him.
You don't make the move you made to have that happen, right? Like that, he's a competitor. I know he's not the Tommy DeVito screaming guy that we saw a year ago, but he is a very, very competitive person. He's a very analytical person. So yeah, I mean, just from that fact, like that stinks. That stinks for him.
Billy, we've gone from being thrilled about 5-7 in year one to being disappointed about in year three. Wouldn't be terrible if realignment wasn't coming. You should be disappointed in 5-7 this year. I don't blame anybody for that, but I do think the program has made strides over the first 3 years. But the fact that you take a step back and didn't take advantage of the opportunity this year certainly is disappointing. James, if we continue to have a coaching carousel, we will not succeed. It seems like every fan base wants to fire a guy after every game, Joey, and just switches to which side of the ball or who's going to do it every game. I do think you got to have some continuity, but next year is obviously a big year for this entire program, this entire coaching staff, because year 4, if you miss a bowl game, then we're talking about where is this all going? Like next year, this is a huge offseason for this staff to make sure next season is a step forward in some way.
Yeah, 100%. Like you can't be in year 3 and 4 with now your guys, quote unquote, your guys developing into foundation rotation players and miss out on a bowl back-to-back years. Like that's where you've really got to have some come to Jesus meetings about that. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like we say that and it doesn't erase the frustration people are feeling right now.
No, and it should.
No, agreed.
Chase, what is your way too early prediction for next year over under 5.5 wins? I got to see what they add to the roster.
I don't know, man.
That's probably the over under will probably be 4.5 or 5.5. I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. It'd be going into last year's similar to that. What was it going into last year? Do you remember?
4.5.
I feel like it'd be fairly similar to that.
Yeah. So 2024, you're going to have an FCS team probably in your first, probably going to be Eastern Illinois. Kansas, Jalen Daniels back. Scares me. You probably got to hope Lance Leipold's not back, right?
And you probably yeah.
Central Michigan win at Nebraska. Those are the games you got to win. You got to stay in front of Nebraska. At Penn State, obviously very difficult. Off week, Purdue. Got to start beating Purdue. Got to start beating them.
Yes.
That's been a real issue for Illinois. Michigan at home, good luck. Might be a new head coach. At Oregon, good luck. Minnesota, got to keep beating Minnesota. You've done well with that. You've kind of been ahead of them. Michigan State, first-year head coach Jonathan Smith, at Rutgers, at Northwestern. Like, there are wins there. Like, if they address the holes I think they need to address, your expectation should be they go over that. Like, it's year 4 of Bret Bielema. It needs to be over that.
Yes, I agree with that. Now, I don't know that the reality is going to be that. Again, we need to see what that looks like in the next month and a half. I see numbers in here. We don't know what half of the, like half, it's probably a high number. Like, we don't know who some of of 11 starters on each side of the ball. I would say I don't right now realistically feel like I can say who more than 7 of them are going to be.
Joe, you should know this question because you did a huge story on this. How many more wins, Nick asked, would the Illini have if they had a defense that could have stopped a 2-minute offense a few times at the end of the half this season? That could be second half or first half or second half, the end of games.
I need to go back and find that story, Nicholas, because I did dive into that.
They've given up a lot of points at the end of the half.
Kansas comes to mind. I want to say Toledo may have.
Yeah, because they were up 19-7.
Did Penn State not get a field goal late?
I can't.
I'd have to go back and look. I don't want to waste time guessing and checking here, but yeah, that had been. I wish I'd asked Bret Bielema this today because he had talked about it in one of his final answers. Like, those have been a problem for Elmo. Those end of half scenarios that team are able to just fly down the field when you think you finally built something momentum wise, and it's happened time and time again.
Yeah. Checking out some of these other questions before we wrap up.
There's some really good ones in here. Like, I do want to bring that up.
21-11. Hey, thanks, Jeremy, Joey. Thanks for doing these all year. Yeah, I know they can get heated sometimes in the chat, and guys, just be nice to each other. I know you're all frustrated with what's happening, but we try to be even keel in these things. I think we're trying to address what is a frustration. Like this is a missed opportunity, but also the reality of, how difficult this job is. This is a really difficult job and has been for a while. And Bret Bielema's got him in close games. You just got to figure out how to win more of these. And that's my big question. Probably what I'll write about is, can you elevate? Can you elevate after missing a bowl game? Can you find what you need in the portal? Can you fix the things you need to fix in making these mistakes with all the talent that's going out the door? And those are the major questions. But yes, we enjoy doing these. They're more fun after a win because you guys are in a better mood. To be honest with you, like whether we go to Detroit or Arizona probably isn't that big of a deal to us, but like covering a team that's happy to be someplace, covering coaches that are like that, and writing for a fan base that is excited, like that's more fun. This isn't as much fun having to talk about this, especially after talking to players like Isaiah Adams getting emotional after this game. You talked to Casey. Yeah, like those guys have been awesome to cover. To see them, just gutted after this, it's difficult.
Yeah, and look, maybe some people don't, but I would recommend. I spent some time with Casey, and we both talked to Isaiah. Just watch them, like just watch and hear what they have to say, because I think there's a lot of value in that. That's why we talk to these guys, and like people hanging out here frustrated. That's awesome. Like you guys help us think through a lot of stuff that maybe we hadn't not thought of, but like having to answer you or getting to answer you helps us formulate some thoughts, and then we just sit down and write, and it's fun, and it's able to, you guys help us out, and you guys don't have to spend your time after a loss hanging out with us, and you do, and like that, we don't lose sight of that, man.
Mike, thanks for the $4.99 super chat. Thanks for the detailed coverage this season. What was the biggest missed opportunity to win the Big Ten West? I mean, obviously Wisconsin, you're up and you give up 18 straight points to end that game. That one is a huge missed opportunity, but you were winning that game. Johnny Newton gets tossed out. That was a huge game, season changer right there. But for me, it was just not even showing up for that Nebraska game. That was the most disappointing game of the entire season. Like these Wisconsin, Northwestern, Joe, it's just like, God, how do you lose those? Even Iowa, you had an opportunity to win that one, but didn't even give yourself a chance against Nebraska. So I think it was that Nebraska-Purdue back-to-back.
100%.
I thought that was your season right there. 6 of your worst quarters of the season all in a row, and against teams that I think you should have beaten, teams that I think you were better than over the entire season, because Illinois' offense could score points, Nebraska's could not. And Nebraska just bully balled you, and you let that happen. And then you had special teams errors, cost you that game as well. So I thought the defense played well enough to win, but those 2 games, that's where I thought this team's not making a bowl game, was when they followed that bad second half against Purdue with just a no-show against Nebraska and go 2-4.
Yeah, and Dallas, if that wasn't a question, I'd be curious, Dallas, if you'd repeat the question for us so we can answer it honestly for you here. I would also, just so I'm not echoing exactly what you said, coming back from Maryland when you feel like you've got something. That was Wisconsin after that, yeah? It was Maryland, Wisconsin followed the Maryland game. Like to not close that one out and feel like you close that one out for all the crap that was the first 6 games, like you can put yourself in a serious spot, and you've got a little mojo to you, and like that would be the only other, I guess, counter I would make, but it's without question those 2 back-to-back games.
Yeah. All right, anything else you want to hit on, Joey, before we get out of here? We got it right.
Nah, man, I'm glad we get to do this. Really glad we get to do this.
Can Dallas and Dominic get together and just do their own post-game podcast? I think that would make for an interesting one if people want to hang out with them. They seem like they're 2 birds of a feather.
Hey, I'm glad Dallas decided to come kick it with us. New name for us in the chat. Thanks for hanging out with us, man. Appreciate that.
You're so nice.
Trying to be. New year, new me.
Well, hey, thank you for everybody for hopping on with us in these post-game podcasts. It does help us formulate our thoughts and think about things in maybe a different way. And I know it was a frustrating season, but it's always fun talking with you guys. And we really appreciate all the support. Seen a couple people say they've signed up for VIP memberships. That is our lifeblood. We love doing this stuff, but the VIP memberships is really helps us out. Let's just go wherever the Illini go and cover them wherever they go. So appreciate all your support for that. I will have an off-season checklist. We'll have a column. Joey will have some stories coming out of this. And of course, we have a huge off-season right ahead, Joey. So we might not be going anywhere for a bowl game, but we are going to be busy over the next month heading into the holidays with early signing period, the transfer portal, all of that. We're going to be pretty busy here.
I'm looking across the street at State Farm, men's basketball, women's basketball. Let's keep going, man. This is fun. It's a fun job.
All right, everybody, have a great night. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inqurier podcast.